British cinema has produced giants, game changers, and films that never let go. Some picks you'll expect, others may surprise you. These are the 10 greatest British films of all time, ranked by the British Film Institute. Trainspotting should have been a small, grim film about heroin addiction, quietly dumped into the art house circuit. Instead, Danny Boyle treats it like a jolt of adrenaline and sells it with the confidence of a summer blockbuster. Mid-90s British cinema is still stuck on polite realism, and this thing crashes through that world like a hangover colliding with a rave. The story is simple enough, junkies scraping by in Edinburgh.
And what? Pleasure. It's like my pleasure and other people's leisure.
What makes it hit is how that world looks and feels. Those stark orange posters turn a bunch of wasters into a global brand. The budget is only about £1.5 million, so the crew have to get clever. That notorious worst toilet in Scotland is built out of melted chocolate, then turned into a slide, so Ewan McGregor can literally vanish into the set. Visually, Boyle walks away from the washed-out social drama look and leans into bold color, sharp contrast, and a soundtrack that is mixed to feel loud in your chest, with Iggy Pop driving the pace. It does more than become a cult hit. It quietly kills off the idea of the polite British film for audiences around the world and shows a whole generation of indie directors that when you do not have money, style is the thing that can still make your film feel huge. Most audiences hear ballet film and expect something delicate and well-behaved, but The Red Shoes plays like a psychological thriller about what happens when art starts asking for blood. On paper, it is just a backstage story, yet Powell and Pressburger refuse to treat the stage as a flat space. The camera moves with the dancers, pushes into their faces, and slips behind them, so the performance feels less like a show and more like a window into their heads. At the center is that 17-minute ballet sequence where realism is dropped completely. Sets dissolve into painted skies and impossible spaces that could never exist in a real theater. The cinematography comes from Jack Cardiff, a painter turned cameraman who pushed 3-strip Technicolor to its limit, letting the red flare against the greens until the color itself feels hostile, like another character closing in on the dancers. Studios thought they were backing a graceful romance and instead ended up with a fever dream about the cost of devotion. And for director Martin Scorsese, this is the movie that plays in my heart, the film he credits with teaching him how to move a camera. He even owns one of the original pairs of red ballet shoes, now housed at the BFI in London, a reminder of how completely this film rewired the way cinema can look, move, and feel. This is a ghost story that feels less like a narrative and more like memory loss caught on film. And director Nicholas Roeg designed Don't Look Now to twist the timeline until the audience feels as disoriented as the characters. He refused to shoot the postcard Venice of the travel brochures, waiting specifically for the off-season to capture the fog, the cold, and the empty alleys. The production treats the city like a trap, not a backdrop. Almost every choice is designed to unsettle. Roeg kept Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie in freezing conditions so their shivers wouldn't be acting. Even the famous love scene is cross-cut with the couple getting dressed afterwards, stripping away the movie star glamour to reveal the ordinary comfort of a long marriage. The recurring red coat isn't just a costume, it is a visual trigger that trains you to search every frame for danger. You can feel its shadow in later films like Hereditary and We Need to Talk About Kevin, where grief and memory become the real source of dread. It shifted the mechanics of the genre, moving away from jump scares and proving that the editing room is just as effective at creating fear as a monster. It is rare to find a movie about childhood that refuses to lie to you, but Kes has zero interest in cute kids or tidy life lessons. Ken Loach went to Barnsley, bypassed the casting agencies, and found David Bradley, a local boy who had never acted and didn't look like he belonged near a camera. Then he demanded the kid do something most professionals would never attempt: train the kestrel himself. There were no animal wranglers swapping birds between takes. The bond you see is the result of months of real labor in real fields. The accents were so thick that United Artists executives panicked, threatening to subtitle the film for audiences south of Sheffield. Loach refused to touch the audio. He shot in natural gray light, stripping away any trace of swinging 60s glamour to show the dead-end reality of the North. The bird isn't a cute symbol, it is the only glimpse of freedom in a life predetermined by the coal mine. More than 50 years on, it hasn't lost its power. Kes proved a small story could change British cinema, and it's still inspiring people who grew up without a safety net. Kind Hearts and Coronets doesn't play like the polite comedy its surface suggests. Ealing Studios had a reputation for gentle stories, but here they leaned into something colder and funnier. A single man works his way through the aristocrats in front of him, removing them one at a time while never letting his manners slip. Alec Guinness plays 8 members of the same family, and the camera work to pull that off was so precise a small knock or vibration could ruin days of setup. What gives the film its edge is how ordinary the deaths feel. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just another task crossed off the list. In a post-war Britain obsessed with order, morality, and tidy consequences, this kind of humor felt close to disrespect. The system is mocked, the upper class is disposable, and not a single character is there to reassure the audience. American distributors were so uncomfortable they demanded a rewritten ending where balance is restored, because the original version was simply too confident in its cynicism. Now that time has passed, the hesitation around it feels almost funny. What once worried censors is exactly what earned its longevity. Today, it's recognized not as an oddity, but as one of the greatest black comedies ever made. Great Expectations takes a school syllabus classic and turns it into a straight-up nightmare. David Lean ignores the politeness of the book and treats it like a ghost story about guilt chasing a boy from the graveyard to the drawing room. He drags the camera out of the safe interiors and into the Kent marshes, wrapping the opening scene in fog, mud, and warped gravestones. Nothing here is cozy. The churchyard uses forced perspective, hanging detailed miniatures inches from the lens to make the world feel like it is physically closing in on the child. The sound design is equally hostile. That famous shrieking wind doesn't just set the mood, it cuts right through you. Inside Satis House, the rooms are lit like horror stages, high contrast, rotting fabrics, and cobwebs that look like they might bite back. Lean and cinematographer Guy Green smuggled the hard shadows of German expressionism into a respectable British drama, just as the country was facing its own post-war ruin. It rescued classic fiction from the library and put it on screen with teeth, creating a visual blueprint for gothic fantasy that directors like Tim Burton and Guillermo del Toro are still drawing from. Back in the mid-1930s, a thriller usually meant people standing in a room talking about danger instead of running from it. Alfred Hitchcock wasn't interested in that. With the 39 Steps, he built the blueprint for the modern chase movie by deciding that the location had to change every 10 minutes. He dragged the production out of the soundstage and onto the Scottish moors, treating the landscape as a physical obstacle course rather than a painted backdrop. The plot is just fuel. He coined the term MacGuffin for the secret plans, admitting they exist solely to keep Robert Donat moving from a music hall to the precipice of the Fourth Bridge. He handcuffs Donat to Madeleine Carroll, forcing a friction and chemistry that feels electric compared to the polite romances of the era. The film refuses to let you catch your breath, stripping away the exposition to focus entirely on momentum. It created the template for the Man on the Run movie. If you strip down North by Northwest or the early Bond films, you will find the skeleton of this movie underneath. Most historical epics feel like victory laps, but David Lean shoots Lawrence of Arabia as a 4-hour breakdown. Adapted from T. Lawrence's own account, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, it turns the desert into a psychology test as much as a war story. The crew dragged heavy 70mm cameras over real dunes and worked in heat so fierce it warped the film stock inside the magazines. On screen, the landscape stops being background and starts acting like an antagonist. The Super Panavision frame crushes the actors, shrinking whole armies into dots against a horizon that never seems to move. So every crossing feels like it might finish them off. Lean connects these huge set pieces with brutal efficiency, most famously cutting from a blown-out match to the rising sun, skipping hours of travel in a single edit, and trusting the audience to fill the gap. At the center is Peter O'Toole, whose clear blue eyes start out idealistic and slowly turn unnerving as he gets hooked on his own legend. He doesn't play a steady officer. He plays a man changing in ways that scare even him. Directors like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas have treated this film like a handbook. It killed the cheap sword and sandal genre overnight. It taught the industry that the widest lens in the bag is useless unless you point it at a character broken enough to fill the frame. Most critics label Brief Encounter a gentle romance, but David Lean directs it like a thriller, where the enemy is the clock on the wall. He dragged the production to Carnforth Station in the dead of winter, using the deafening roar of real steam trains to shatter the intimacy. The noise isn't atmospheric, it's an assault. It drowns out the dialogue, forcing the characters to shout over the reality that keeps pulling them apart. Celia Johnson delivers one of the great performances in British cinema by doing absolutely nothing. No shouting, no grand speeches. She conveys total devastation just by staring at a timetable, letting the damage sit behind her eyes. The Rachmaninoff score screams the emotions 1940s respectability forbids them from saying. This film redefined the genre by showing that the most violent heartbreak doesn't happen on a balcony, it happens in a train station cafe while you politely finish your tea. The Third Man sits at the top of the BFI list because it is where British cinema stopped behaving and started skulking around in the dark. Producer David O. Selznick wanted a clean studio thriller. Carol Reed went to occupied Vienna instead. The city is not a backdrop, it is a body. He shoots in real, bomb-shattered streets, using rubble no art department could fake. Every night, the fire brigade soaked the cobblestones so the pavements gleamed, turning puddles into black mirrors. Cinematographer Robert Krasker tilts the frame again and again, those off-kilter angles quietly telling you that whatever normal used to mean, it no longer applies here. The sound is just as strange. Instead of a sweeping orchestra, Reed builds the whole mood around Anton Karas and his nervous zither, a tune he heard in a wine garden and refused to let go of. Then Orson Welles walks in and improvises the cuckoo clock speech.
They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So long, Howard.
It is one of the most iconic moments in film history, turning a black market murderer into the most charming man in the room. That combination of wet streets, moral rot, and effortless cool became the visual Bible for modern noir. Ridley Scott and the Coen brothers did not simply watch this film. They studied it. It earns the crown because it has the courage to leave the audience empty-handed. That final, unbroken shot is not just a rejection of Hollywood romance. It marks the moment British cinema finally grew up. Thanks for watching. This is VintageVerse, and if you love cinema that pushed boundaries and rewrote the rules, hit subscribe. The next countdown might shake up your list all over again.